Okay, well, a very, I was going to say very warm welcome. You've already been welcomed. Welcome back to the second half. It's very, well, it's interesting to be here in person, isn't it? It still feels like a real novelty. So yeah, it's very good to see you all here. And very lovely to see you all on Zoom as well. I think there's sort of 23 or so of you. So a very warm hello to you. And yeah, we're going to have a talk now. I'm going to talk for a bit. Just let Eileen settle. Yeah, so I'm going to follow on from Kulapriya, who talked to us last week about the niyamas, those levels of conditionality. We're both talking sort of based on a series of talks given by Subhuti in 2010 at the LBC, that's the London Buddhist Centre. Some of his rambles, he's done a lot of rambles. These rambles are rambles around reality. And a lot of what I'm going to say is taken from his second talk on the 5 niyamas. So if you want to investigate further on that, then that is where to go. Well, first of all, can everyone hear me all right here? Yeah. And on Zoom? Thanks. They might just put their thumbs up if they can hear. Don't know. Yes. Marvellous. So I'd like to dedicate what I'm going to say to Bhante Sangha, who's the founder of our movement, my teacher, Subhuti's teacher, on whom this talk is based, his talk. And I also want to dedicate this, the things that I'm going to say to a Dharmacharini called Damotara. Some of you will know her, some of you won't. I'm going to talk a bit more about her towards the end of what I'm going to say. But for now, I think I'll just say she's a woman who I deeply respect as somebody who I think has really practiced the Dharma and really realized some of the things that I'm talking about this evening. So I'd like to dedicate this to Damotara. Okay, so I'm going to kick off with a bit of a whistle-stop even recap of what Kulapriya said last week. Well, not everything Kulapriya said last week, actually. That would be a bit bonkers. But just about the 5 niyamas, so those 5 levels of conditioned existence. So niyamas, they're patterns, they're laws. They're a kind of working out, in a way, of conditioned co-production, which is the sort of fundamental at the heart of Buddhism. This being, that becomes. This not being, that does not become. It's a very sort of simple formulation on how conditioned existence works. Basically, these niyamas are saying that reality isn't random. There are patterns. There are things that we can rely upon that will happen. And reality is not random, as I said. So the first level is the Utu Niyama, matter, physical, inorganic, physics. This is the realm of physics, matter that has no life. An example of the Utu Niyama would be gravity. Then we have the Bija Niyama, which means seed, organic, living, biology, botany. And an example of the Bija Niyama would be something like photosynthesis in sort of simple plants. And then you have the Mano Niyama, which is sort of very simple consciousness, instinctual patterns, such as, it's sort of in the animal realm. So if you smell something delicious, you salivate. You don't really have any control over that. That's the kind of instinct that you have. You might jump at a loud noise, those kind of sort of instinctive built-in patterns. And Kulapriya gave the example last week of migration. So actually these things, the Mano Niyama can be really quite sophisticated, you know, animals migrating over thousands and thousands of miles back to exactly the same place every year. That seems quite extraordinary. So those 3 niyamas, the Utu, the Bija, and the Mano, I'm going to refer to them as the lower niyamas. The lower niyamas. We have little, if any, control over these niyamas. They are sort of in and around us, but there's nothing, very, very little that we can do about them. But they are very much in our experience. And then you have the karma niyama. The fourth niyama is the karma niyama, action, or more specifically, volitional action. So that's not just things we might actually physically do, but also processes and operations that are at play in our minds. And this is the realm of self-consciousness. This is the realm of self-consciousness, when you become aware of you in a way, and you have a sense of what is you and a sense of what is not you, a sense of self. And I'm going to talk a bit more about this as we go on, but what happens within this realm is that what happens with self-consciousness and with a sense of self is that we then appropriate those lower niyamas as being us, as being part of us. We identify with them as us. I'll say a bit more about that. And then the fifth niyama is the Dharma niyama. And that is the point, I think this is directly quoting Subhuti, the point where self-consciousness, where the self-conscious individual comes into contact with something else, which is suitably mysterious. And we need a more refined sensitivity in order to come into contact with the Dharma niyama. And the Dharma niyama is what allows a Buddha to emerge. I'm going to explore this a bit more later on. But I think this is a Subhuti quote. I wrote it down and now I can't quite fully remember. But intelligent life is where you learn to live with the regularities rather than fight against them. So intelligent life is where you learn to live with these five niyamas and sort of learning how they operate and how we operate with them. Actually, we interact with them. You learn to live with the regularities rather than fight against them. So that's a bit of a whistle stop through the niyamas. I'm now going to talk about the sort of the meat, if you will, of Subhuti's second talk on the niyamas, is how we work with the niyamas within our system of practice. So we have a system of practice that Bhante Sangha has expounded for us. There's five, well, we talk about 5 stages of the system of practice, but in a way, it's not linear necessarily. They're all very much kind of integrated within each other. So I'm just going to take us through each stage and just explore a bit how we might be working with the niyamas within each stage. So the first stage of the system of practice is integration. This will be familiar to some of you and perhaps not familiar to others of you. Integration. So integration, fundamentally, we're talking about a mindfulness of our experience, becoming fully aware of what our experience is. So for example, in meditation, we generally begin by practicing awareness of our bodily experience. We'll do a body scan. We'll go through just being aware of what's actually sort of happening in our bodies, any feelings, any sensations. And it's the sort of that vital first step of really sort of grounding ourselves and entering into meditation. And Subhuti equates this with the 3 lower niyamas, with the utu, with the bija, and with the mano. We're kind of getting in touch with and getting to know those 3 lower levels of conditioned existence. And I've just found it really interesting to think about the fact that we've got no control over these, pretty much. They are just present. and yet they're operating within us, around us, and all we can do actually is to observe them and how they are ever changing. And for me, it's an area of real work, because often I will impose an idea of how I want my body to be, how I want to be feeling, how I think it should be. There will be some kind of dialogue going on. So I'd like it to be pain-free, I'd like it to be calm, pleasurable, strong, still, you know, I want it to be all of those things. And integration is, in a way, it's developing and sustaining mindfulness of simply what is present without the judgment or the commentary, or maybe being aware of the commentary and taking it a bit less seriously than you might normally do. And we can see in this process, I think this process of integration, sort of how identified we can become with these processes. And I was thinking particularly about pain. So I experienced sort of ongoing chronic pain to varying degrees. And if I experience pain, it's very seldom that I will just experience the physical pain. There will be all sorts of things going on in my mind. So, oh, this means this means that, this is my fault, this is somebody else's fault, this isn't fair, why me, blah, blah, blah. And it will go on and on. There's so much of my identity or my sense of self that gets appropriated to, in a way, those lower niyamas. I'm sort of hanging on to them for something. But actually, and I think it's quite natural to do that. I don't think that's, you know, a ridiculous thing to do necessarily. I think we all, well, maybe I suggest we all might do that in our different ways. But I think that a useful question is, well, is it true? But maybe more importantly, is it helpful? Is it actually helpful to get into that level of dialogue with yourself about just simply what's happening? We have to start here. We can't move any further. We can't grow, I suggest. The title of this talk is How We Grow. We can't grow unless we are aware of where we're starting, unless we've got that self-awareness. And it's interesting to me, Prakasha, who's an order member of some long-standing within our movement, a few years ago at an order convention, he was talking about the system of practice, and he's probably not the first person to have done this, but it's the first time I saw it. He put the 5 stages of the system of practice into a mandala rather than a list, and he put integration, mindfulness of experience, at the center of that mandala. So that, I think, speaks volumes about how fundamental it is for all the other stages. So that's integration. And then the next stage, I've decided I'm going to take a sip between each stage, is we're used to hearing it called positive emotion. It could also be called skillful intention. And Subhuti is very keen on the phrase helpful intention, helpful intention. So I think that mindfulness of integration, in a way, that holding of our experience that we've been doing, accepting the experience, it requires an attitude, it requires an intention of kindly acceptance. So the next stage, but actually to call it the next stage, it probably isn't accurate. I think each stage is inherent in each stage, is to cultivate, to develop helpful intentions, helpful attitudes, kindness, fundamentally metta, fundamentally what we've just been practicing in the first half, well-wishing, loving kindness for ourselves and for others. And this is the area of ethics. This is the practice of ethics, a kind of a growing awareness that if we act from an intention of helpfulness, of kindness, of non-violence, of generosity, contentment, non-grasping, truthfulness, together with awareness, that is key, I think, our world becomes happier and richer. Subhuti suggests we have a greater depth and satisfaction to our experience. And just thought I'd briefly talk about, some of you will have done the introductory course that we run here at the CBC, but there's a little exercise in that that I think really speaks of this what I'm talking about. So it's very simple. Just bring to mind something that you've done that you don't feel very happy about, that you feel like you acted from, I don't know, a sort of feeling of anger or of upset, or maybe some selfishness, whatever. And you just bring that to mind. And then you just notice what your experience is. And what happened, I'll speak for myself, but always what happens for me in that is my shoulders will hunch over, my brow will furrow, and it will feel really quite dark and isolated, just simply not very pleasant. And what's interesting is when you ask around, because then everyone sort of shares their experiences from this, that's fairly universal. You've got all these different people thinking about all these different things, but invariably it's pretty much similar experiences that people are coming up with. And then of course you bring to mind something that you feel where you came from a helpful place, a skillful place, a place of kindness or generosity or whatever, and then you sit and you feel that experience. And you know what my experience is, an opening out of my shoulders, everything feels lighter, more spacious, connected. And it's really interesting when you do that in a room full of people, you can feel the shift in the atmosphere and the sort of lightness coming in. And that, I mean, that's a very simple exercise, and maybe a little bit simplistic, but fundamentally, that is the law of karma at work. That is sort of helpful, skillful actions having sort of opening, refining, connecting, richer, deeper results or effects upon us. And the opposite, the sort of the unhelpful, just what that can do to your experience of the world, actually. And so Subhuti's talking about refining our consciousness in this way, working with helpful intentions, skillful intentions, to refine our consciousness as a kind of process of evolution, of growth, of change. And of course, it is a process. It is a process. And it's got nothing to do with external conditions, which can be quite a challenging thing to think about. You can be in a bad situation with a deep sense of inner fulfillment. You can be in a good situation, whatever that might be, and feel unsatisfied and unhappy. And I was thinking about an example of this from my own life. So I had long COVID. I was really unwell with COVID for about 6 months last year, mostly sort of in bed. And there were times during that where I felt very wretched and miserable and angry and upset. And there were times during that where I felt deeply fulfilled and connected and kind of alive with the Dharma, actually. Nothing about my external situation had changed, but it was the way that I was creatively working with my intentions, with my sort of wish, kindness for myself and for the people I was living with as well, to work creatively with that in some way, and it changed my experience. And actually, it was just came to me in the meditation that we just had, sort of thinking about growth and evolution. So about 10 years ago, I spent an even longer time in bed. I had ME for like 2 years. And my memory of that is that it was almost completely pretty bleak. And this was before I had any kind of, well, very little experience of practicing the Dharma. I didn't really know how to work creatively. I hadn't been working creatively. I hadn't built up any kind of momentum as well, which I think is important. So there's definitely been a growth and evolution in my ability to work creatively with my mental states. Just doesn't, in a way, doesn't matter what's going on. Yeah. So the practices we've got for developing helpful intentions, we've just done one. The metta bhavana is a way we practice doing that. If we're practicing sort of actively with ethical practice, we're looking to see how we can work with the precepts that we have. Yeah, that's a couple of examples of that. So then moving on to spiritual death, which is the third stage. It sounds suitably dramatic. In order to grow and to evolve, we have to change. And that might sound really obvious, but in my experience, I can be very averse to change. I kind of think I want it, but in reality, when it comes to it, to actually changing, I'm less keen. Because it can feel scary, it can feel unfamiliar. And well, yeah, just there can be some real fear about it. And I think as this sort of refinement goes on with these helpful intentions in our minds, Subhuti's talking about our consciousness refines, we become more able, more likely to feel, and this is his expression, which I really like, the touch of the Dharma Niyama. The touch of the Dharma Niyama. We're more likely to be open and receptive to the Dharma Niyama and its influences. We're more spacious, we're less self-identified, and perhaps less bound up in those lower niyamas. And I think I just wanted to say something at this point. I think integration and helpful intention, they're absolutely fundamental, and I don't think we can make any growth or evolution without them. But they alone will not really transform us. They will not allow us to reach our full potential. We will become more aware, probably kinder, more compassionate beings, probably happier beings. But just them won't connect us in, won't allow us to really realize what's fully possible, to evolve to our full capacities. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So yeah, Subhuti talks about this spiritual death. It's like we've got this spaciousness and there can be a sort of bursting in of a new consciousness, and it can seem overwhelming and really scary. And I was just going to relate an experience I had quite a few years ago now. I don't think I could say that it was an experience of the Dharma Niyama, but there's something about it that rings somewhere in that, it rings true in some way. So I thought I'd share it. So I was having a dream, and it was a lucid dream. I've only ever had a couple of lucid dreams in my life. So lucid dreams where you become aware that you're dreaming. It's a very odd feeling. And I was living in Ipswich at the time, and in the dream I was in Ipswich town centre on the Cornhill. It was nighttime, it was winter, there was snow on the ground, it was nearing Christmas, there were Christmas lights everywhere. And I was just standing on the top of the Cornhill, suddenly became aware that I was dreaming. And I sort of rose up to sort of slightly above the buildings. And there was just this extraordinary feeling like, I could do absolutely anything. Like everything became really spacious. And I was just sort of, my mind became really spacious, and there was just this sudden realization that there were no boundaries. I could go anywhere, do anything. And there was that, I don't know how long that went on for in the dream, but then within the next moment, I went into Debenhams. Scuttled into Debenhams. I could still remember it so clearly, and that feeling of like, just, you know, it was fear. It was absolute fear, that closing down, not being able to stay with that openness or those possibilities. Just went into Debenhams, looked at the baubles, and yes. So in order, this is almost directly Subhuti, in order to evolve and to grow into this new consciousness, we have to learn to let go and train ourselves to die. For the Dharma Niyama to emerge in you, you have to let go of the lower niyamas. And you have to let go in terms of your self-identity as a body, your cultural identity, family identity, psychological conditioning. Unless we learn to die to our old self-identification, we cannot allow something new to emerge. One of the practices we have for this would be reflecting on the 3 Lakshmanas. So the 3 Lakshmanas are that everything is impermanent, everything is insubstantial, and everything is unsatisfactory. And if you spend any amount of time reflecting on, you could just take one and just think about any aspect of your experience. You can just reflect upon whether you find that to be true or not. And it's a way, in a way of loosening, again, those attachments to those lower niyamas of like maybe your body, you know, it's impermanent. I think they say there's nothing in your body that is here now that would have been there 7 years ago. Like everything's constantly changing and shifting. So what is you actually? You know, we identify so strongly with this, but actually this isn't anything that's permanent. So yeah, these practices allow us to be aware of the lower niyamas, and what's crucial is be aware of them, but not identified with them. That's the key thing. So at this point, Subhuti does a little sort of summing up. So integration, you learn to see where you're really bound up with the niyamas. Helpful intention, you learn to act in a helpful way that allows your experience to open in a richer, deeper, more sensitive way that also might benefit others. And then you need to learn to die, to let go of it, facing up to the terror that might come with letting something new in. And I think it comes to all of us in different ways, potentially. It can also be deeply blissful as well. I mean, I'm sort of talking about the fear of it. I think in my experience, I often sort of perhaps feel something very open and then I just close down a bit, like, you know, I go into Debenhams. I think other people can respond in different ways. And it's just needing to disengage from that narrow identification that we have. And I was thinking of an example of myself, allowing myself to die to the idea that being lonely or feeling loneliness is a bad thing, a fearful thing. So for very, very many, well, all my life probably, I have not wanted to feel loneliness. It doesn't fit with my self-identity of who I think I want to be. It's a fearful feeling. It's embarrassing. I failed. I'm not a good enough person. All of that kind of thing comes into the sort of commentary on that feeling of loneliness. And what I've done in my practice, I've turned towards it again and again with helpful intention, with as much kindness as I can muster. And just discovered that it's actually, if you just sit with it, it's a very beautiful feeling. It's a very beautiful feeling. It's very still and serene. And it's interesting, I was talking to my good friend Deborah, some of you all know Deborah, the other day, trying to describe it to her, and I was saying, like, it's like moonlight. It's like moonlight coming in. And she said, oh, that'll be why I put that picture of the moon on that book. And I'd completely forgotten, but there's a book called Solitude and Loneliness available in the bookshop. And she designed the cover for that, and she put a moon on it. And I was just, there's something about my experience of loneliness is actually that it feels very connecting. There's suddenly this awareness that, well, actually everybody feels loneliness. Everybody feels that. So it's just very beautiful. And the fact that she'd had that I don't know, that we were that connection, those symbols that can connect us. So that just fascinates me. So yeah, so I've overcome my fear of feeling lonely, and it's opened up something very beautiful that I can now really enjoy, actually. And so then spiritual rebirth is the fourth stage. After spiritual death, we have the spiritual rebirth. So spiritual death allows something new to unfold. It creates a space in a way. They're not closing down, they're not shutting the door, they're not running into debenhams. Allows something new to come in. And perhaps in the case of me facing sort of loneliness, the moonlight peeps in a way. And you embrace it willingly. And so my attitude to loneliness has really changed, completely changed, actually. And what happens is the Buddha allowed the Dharma Niyama to completely emerge within him. That is how he became enlightened, allowing this mysterious force. It's very difficult to talk about, famously beyond words and concepts. And we have those little experiences, I would say, those sort of expansive feelings of joy, of peace. I've had it in meditation, sort of really, it's touching the Dharma Niyama and just feeling like, again, actually a bit like that dream, it's like this spaciousness of just feeling like I could just go to the Buddha. I could just, my mind, my consciousness has become so open. And free. And then, this process of spiritual rebirth is working on that fear, because nearly always I will close down to it because it feels too big or too much. And taking these experiences seriously, I think, and realizing that they can become more and more our experience. Yeah, more and more our experience. So Subhuti says those are the deliberate practices. So we're talking about 50% deliberate practices: integration, helpful intention, spiritual death, spiritual rebirth. And then we have just sitting. Just sitting is the final stage. And that takes up the other 50% of what we need to be doing. So just being receptive. Every stage has to be accompanied by an opening up to what is experienced at that stage. Just sitting and allowing things to unfold, developing trust over time, that will happen, actually developing faith that we will evolve and grow as we do these practices. And Subhuti suggests reading about others who have gone before can really help deepen our confidence and our faith in our own abilities to grow and evolve. And he talks about reading about Bhante. We've got lots of autobiographies that we can read of Bhante in his life. And I thought of some the things that I found deeply inspiring. There's a book called Cave in the Snow, which is about Tenzin Palmo, which is extraordinary, sort of woman of our time, and what she was experiencing. And I was given a book by Jackie, thank you very much, In Love with the World by Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche, which I suspect I pronounced wrong. That's an extraordinary story of a monk who goes from the closeted world of the monastery out into the actual world, and just his experiences, and just how you can see how far he has evolved actually in his being. And then I just wanted to end by talking about Dhammottara, who for me is somebody that I find deeply inspiring and gives me real confidence in the possibility of growing and evolving with practice. So Dhammottara was an order member. She was here in Cambridge. She only arrived in Cambridge in 2017. She was in Manchester before then. And in 2019, Dhammottara died from cancer. Before she died, she gave a talk. She gave a talk here in this very room. And it was called Facing Death Without Fear. She gave that talk in January 2019. I cannot recommend that talk highly enough. It's on free Buddhist audio. Facing Death Without Fear. And she gave it when she'd stopped any active treatment and she'd been given months to live. And actually she gave that talk in the January and she died in the August of that same year. And she really wanted to give this talk. She asked if she could give this talk. And she wanted to give the talk because she was facing death without fear. She had gone beyond fear of dying, which was quite extraordinary. And you could feel it, it was palpable. It wasn't like somebody sort of going, oh yeah, you know, I don't know, you could say like, can you like, oh, it's fine, no, I'm not afraid. You could fit, there was something in her that was quite extraordinary. Yeah. And just picking out a few things that she said, and in terms of, you know, how she was practicing with these stages and with the niyamas, in this phase of integration, she was talking about being in hospital. And she says, there's nothing to do in hospital but lay and watch. It was a very meditative experience. Just experiencing her own bodily sensations, some of which were very uncomfortable, and observing other people's. And she said that these three words kept coming to her: normal, natural, and ordinary. And the way she was being with these three lower niyamas, you know, our bodies working in their biologies and whatever else is going on, realizing that she had no control actually at that point. And she's just talked about the suffering that was lifted when you align yourself with that truth of how things really are. So she was just practicing this whilst in hospital. I was very moved at her practice of positive emotion, helpful intention. There was a woman next to her in the bed who was very anxious and disturbed, and would cry out a lot and make a lot of noise and be very fearful during the night. And Demotra described getting up and rubbing lavender into this woman's hands and doing what she could to comfort her. And I was so struck by that attitude of positive emotion. It would be so easy in that situation to just feel really annoyed with that woman, like, you know, feel very sorry for yourself and be wanting to get some sleep or whatever. But what Demotra was doing, and there was no, when she was talking about it, there was just no, she was just wanting to alleviate this woman's suffering. It was quite extraordinary. And again, she talks about, you know, this realizing that all this pain and fear was coming from wanting to control what we have no control over. And she said that she revered Adam Brooks for being a teacher of that. And at that time, she describes her experience as being deeply rich and beautiful. And this feels like some sort of spiritual rebirth in there, really. She talks about a lot of joy, dying to the fear, and this joy just flooding in. And so just sitting, I felt like we were just sitting with her when she was giving this talk. She'd obviously done a lot of reflecting, and it felt like she was giving this talk, but she was just exuding something else actually, and we were able to sort of absorb that in some way. She was talking from the richness and depth of her practice of those 5 stages and how she's working with the niyamas. I find Demotra very inspiring. I sort of said, you know, hers was a lifetime of practice. Actually, it was 28 years of practice. I did a bit of research to see when she met the Dharma. I mean, I've no idea what she was doing before that. She might have well been doing other things, sort of complementary to that. But she didn't suddenly start practicing when she got ill. So she had a momentum of practice that seems to have really borne fruit when she became ill. And she just evolved. She'd grown into a space of contentment and wisdom that was beyond fear. And she said herself when she was doing this talk, she's sending back a report from the front line to let you know that you didn't need to be, it was possible to not be afraid, like truly just not have any fear there. It's quite extraordinary. So we all have the opportunity to evolve and grow in this way. As we work bit by bit, day by day, we might not notice it on a daily basis, but we can look back and see how we've changed, perhaps see the evolution that we have made. And if you can't see it, ask friends, because often they can help you see it. And so much more is possible. So much more is possible. It's normal, natural, and ordinary, to quote Dharmottara. The niyamas are in operation. They just are. And we can have a deeper and deeper faith that we can evolve if we align ourselves with that reality. And we work within our practices to align ourselves more and more to that reality. And I just wanted to end with a quote from Bhante Sangha. This is from the survey. And he's talking about the law of conditioned co-production, so the law at the heart of the niyamas, the law that the niyamas are an expression of. A law whose operation is at the heartbeat of Buddhism. The law that when the conditions for the production of a phenomenon, from the falling of a leaf to the birth of a Buddha, are present, the effect will inevitably follow. I'll leave it there. Thanks. And so what we'll do now is we've got time for groups. We've got about 20 minutes for groups. I've given Zoom the questions for the groups, so they've got them up there. But they would be, do you have a sense of how you're engaging with the different stages of the system of practice? Do you have a sense of how you're engaging with the different stages of the system of practice? And another question you might like to think about, I mean, you can talk about anything you want to in your groups, anything that's come up, any questions, any thoughts. The other question would be, how are you growing? How are you evolving? And how would you like to? So if you want to